welcome, folks. So perhaps we should get started. So I was gonna go ahead and introduce myself, and just once again invite people to chat your locations and start your video if you can. And I'm also going to chat a link right now, which will be useful to join us for Slido. And I'll be introducing that in a second. But I want to start out by saying, welcome to Peace Week. This is organized by the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. And each semester, Carter School Peace Week brings together faculty, students, and alumni, as well as friends and partners from across the peace and conflict resolution community for a week-long conversation around how to effectively address urgent issues of peace and justice. And our theme for the fall 2024 Peace Week is Horizons of Innovation and Entrepreneurship for Peace. And this session is going to talk about enlisting our workplaces as shared spaces for depolarizing America. I want to introduce myself. My name is Randy Lioz. I am a master's student at the Carter School, and I've had about 7 years of experience with the work of political depolarization. It started out with an organization called Braver Angels that brings together people from opposite sides of the political spectrum. I've worked with partners and clients there to address internal polarization and to actually help those organizations contribute to strengthen our country. And while I was doing that, I became convinced of the importance of workplaces as shared spaces for this depolarization work. So I brought that perspective to my consulting practice, which is called DOC. So I'm going to share my screen now, if I can. There we go. And I wanted to mention that there are several other folks on this call helping me out. So Professor Dan Rothbart, who is a professor at the Carter School, Sarah Bonk, who started the organization Business for America, and Nikki Frias, who runs Corpdev Strategies. And I'm actually going to be introducing each of them more extensively as we go. But I wanted to first talk about some issues around the subject. And I wanted to introduce the Slido, because we'll be using this for an activity and also to gather your questions. So something that you may not hear at other sessions, if you want to take out your phone and point it at the QR code on the screen, that will allow you to both do the Q&A, submit questions to the Q&A, and also to submit something for the next activity. And the link for that is also in the chat. So without further ado, I want to get to that activity. So I would really like to invite people to share how polarization has affected your lives and your relationships. And so you're welcome to chat something into the Slido, to submit a comment into the Slido, or you also are welcome to raise your hand if you wanted to just speak something live. But I wanted to give you a minute to think about how polarization has affected your life and relationships. And I'm going to put that music back on to give you a minute to think. And if you could each just submit something or raise your hand to mention how you've been impacted by polarization, we'd really appreciate it. All right. We are getting some comments already. So families and friendships have been deeply affected. Absolutely. Has limited my ability to have meaningful conversations with people. Wow. That sounds like a pretty intense impact. And it sounds like there's multiple areas of your life that have been affected by that. Holidays are harder. Yeah, so there's a really interesting stat that was brought out a few years ago. Some researchers found that in communities that had I'm gonna pause this music. In communities that had mixed political environments, Thanksgiving dinners were shorter in those areas, and collectively we lost thousands of hours of time, or thousands of years of time together, based on the fact that those dinners were cut shorter. So Yeah, really, really kind of intense impacts there. Affecting relationships with in-laws, strained our relationships. Yeah. Opportunities to learn from relationships with people who, okay, losing those opportunities to learn from people who think differently. Yeah. Um, uh, Within my family, we've agreed for the most part to not engage in political discussions. And, this is part of the issue that we're facing. Uh, that, you know, people are really having a fear, a genuine fear of engaging in these conversations, and it is creating a a situation where in this country where it's a marketplace of ideas, we have stopped engaging with one another about those ideas because of the risk of those conversations. So it is, it's a tough time in this country, and these are the risks that I appreciate you all helping to highlight. So I'm going to stop my screen share now because I want to introduce our first speaker. So though for many of you, he really needs no introduction. So Dan Rothbart is the Drusilla French Chair of Conflict Analysis and Resolution and the director of the Carter School's Transforming the Mind for Peace Lab. And he specializes in prevention of mass violence, ethnic conflicts, power and conflict, the ethics of conflict resolution, civilians in war, and the psychopolitics of conflict. And in this last area, that's where his work is so relevant to the session. Because when I took Karina Korstalina's identity and conflict class last semester, I got to study a theory that she and Dan had developed together, and it's called collective axiology, which describes the way that members of groups on either side of a conflict see each other. So to talk about that theory, please welcome Dan Rothbart.
Well, thanks very much, Randy. And I just am so impressed with your proactive measures in the short time that I've known you. And this is just one event I know of other events that are in the works, which brings us all together. So I would like to provide some information to just show how extremism in the United States has taken over the political rhetoric. That is, the current political crisis in the United States is being fueled to some degree by extremist groups. And what I want to talk about in a few minutes that I have is the nature, the character of hate. And start off with the question, who hates? Who's hating? Who are these people? Well, there's a lot of hate groups right now in the United States. The Southern Poverty Law Center has tracked 1,430 hate groups and anti-government groups in the United States, which is up from the year before. And a hate group, they define as a group that attacks another class of people, another group of people, as a fundamental principle of their operation. In other words, their attacks through speech or behavior of another group of people is central to their work. And they're all over the country. They're all over. They're not limited to just rural or just the South or one region or one economic class. There's 45 hate groups in Virginia and some in Northern Virginia where George Mason is. There is no single ideology that characterizes all hate groups. And I'm listing here somewhat in a not systematic way the groups, the kinds of hate groups that have been active in recent years. There's literally hundreds of anti-government groups. There's general hate groups, that is, against certain groups, minority groups, for example. Of course, there's white nationalists, there are neo-Confederate group, there are anti-fascist groups. So notice that these are recognizing the anti-fascist groups, which illustrates that the hate groups are not limited to one ideology and not limited to right-wing extremists. And there are male supremacist groups. Now, obviously, of these categories, there's some overlap, there's some similarities, but it's very difficult to have even one central universal characteristic of these groups, except for the fact that they engage in violence as central to their practice. So next question, well, what's the impact of hate? So this is a graph that goes from 1995 to 2021, and it shows different categories of hate groups. Now, obviously, if you look at 2021, the largest number of attacks have been committed by violent right-wing extremists. So I'm just saying that a certain number of attacks have been committed by far left-wing, left groups. And what I want to focus on for the few minutes here is the extremist mindset. In my opinion, it's absolutely central to understand what are they thinking? What is going on in their thought process? And I want to emphasize that I'm not just talking about individual psychology, though that's obviously important. Some people individually have emotional problems who commit violent acts, but I want to emphasize here a collective mindset of these groups. And I want to stress four themes that, in my opinion, are quite common to extremism. And I want to emphasize it's not only right-wing extremism, it's left-wing and other cases. And I just want to very briefly go through that. So the first theme is that hate groups invariably give priority to a perceived threat. These threats, that is the group that they're attacking, obviously, these threats tend to be based on very thin information, which I'll say is ideologically thin, but emotionally thick, which means it's very heavily emotional. It's based on shared emotions that are contagious. Now, I don't have time to give many examples, but I will illustrate a few of the practices of a group that you, I'm sure, know about called the Proud Boys, which is a male supremacist group. They have some similarities with anti-government groups, but they are primarily male supremacists. They claim to be not racist, but clearly their positions intersect with racist view, and their threats are repeated. That they claim that white people are experiencing an existential threat, existential precarity, a threat to in-group existence. Okay, so basically what Randy is referring to is the theory. So the collective axiology theory centers on the notion that the conflict dynamics is defined by values. The values, fundamentally the in-group values of self-glory and the out-group disvalue of denigration or dehumanization. And I'll kind of weave that in to this discussion, Randy. So the threat narratives, which obviously are central to conflict dynamics, not just for extremist groups, but for many protracted conflicts. These are just some examples that there's a war against whites, and European and Western societies is under threat, and so on. The true minority in this world are whites, and so on. and the struggle for justice continues. So that's one theme. A second element of the mindset of extremists is imaginary constructs. So imaginary constructs basically are made up ideas that allegedly define a group. They enemy, and I think we all have seen many examples of this. It's very similar to war propaganda, that the enemy is all defined by a single entity, as if they are a single group acting in unison. They are defined by their vice. So it's not just that their actions are brutal and vile, but their very existence is inherently bad, vicious, unjust, or inhuman. That is, it's an essentialism. And this is a common characteristic, certainly of racism, but also a characteristic of an extremist mindset. And third, they are all like this, that their degeneracy is deeply embedded in their race, ethnicity, or religion. So these are imaginary constructs. And here's an example from the Proud Boys of imagining this the fabricated category of non-Western nations and the fabricated category of left-wing groups. Well, clearly there are non-Western nations, there's no question about that, but it's how the extremists characterize them and how they characterize and define left-wing groups. So moving along here, a third characteristic of violent extremists is righteous rage. Righteous rage has defined so much of the political crisis, political behavior. It is with the Proud Boys just an intense emotion of that's a prelude to violence. In one phrase, we have, all I want to do is smash commies. Actually, I'm lying. I'm way just past hitting them. When it comes to time, I will stop at nothing to fully eradicate them. The rage, I'm very intrigued by the power of collective emotion. Rage is contagious, that it is often the vehicle of power. So it is a major political force, not just with extremists, but I think with the many other political groups. Now, rage obviously has its neurological correspondence to a portion of the brain called the amygdala. But I want to emphasize the political nature of rage. So here's a picture of the group of insurrectionists as they're about to attack the Capitol on January 6th. They were clearly exhibiting momentary rage or rage for those hours in terms of their behavior. And that corresponds to kind of the contagion of rage, how rage basically is perpetuated and promoted, obviously, by political figures. Talk show hosts are invariably fabricating rage. And what I think is interesting about the extremist groups and about the political dialogue is the group of enemies come and go. That is, the enemy group may change based on the current issues, but the rage stays the same. That is, there invariably will be a continuity of rage. These are just the groups that are targeted by the Proud Boys and others. And I just listed here, the emotional contagion basically offers political capital to lure potential supporters.
And Dan,
Yeah,
I
am I
think we've
going?
got maybe 30 seconds more if you
Oh, I can do a lot in 30 seconds. Okay, so the fourth theme is the necessity to act, that all of the previous themes are interlinked to the absolute necessity to act. And I just want to end with saying what can be done. Well, there's enormous range of efforts to address political extremism, but one group that I find particularly promising is the insight by former extremists. And the former extremists have obviously special knowledge and in some cases wisdom for figuring out how to de-radicalize groups. And I'm in conversation right now with some of them. But I am going to stop now.
Okay. And I want to add some data to this and give it a little bit more texture. So I'm going to show what is called the perception gap. Now, this is data from a group called More in Common, and they researched how each side feels about one another. And they saw that both Democrats and Republicans both think that the other group broadly agrees with the most extreme voices that they hear amplified in our current media environment. And this is an example of classic availability bias, right? We are constantly confronted with the most extreme and strident versions of our opponents. And it really indicates a level of collective generality that one group casts towards another, right? So this is playing directly into Dan and Karina's theory. So this is from their 2019 report called The Perception Gap. And it shows how much each party thinks that the opponents agree with them, which is the dot on the left, and then how much they actually agree with them. So you can see that the Democrats agree with Republicans much more than Republicans believe, by about 27 points, and Republicans agree with Democrats more than they believe by about 19 points. And there is, when you look at the other ways to sort this perception gap, it turns out that the more closely you follow the news, the more your misunderstanding of the other side happens to be, right? If you follow the news most of the time, then your perception gap is almost 30%. And then one other way that we can look at this is the more education that you have, the more skewed your perception is. So highly educated Democrats are totally caught up with the perception gap that Republicans tend to have in terms of their level of misunderstanding the other side. So we really we take in a lot of information that confirms our pre-existing hypotheses. And the more educated we are, the more information that we are able to take to confirm those hypotheses. So it's a bit of an irony there. And the last thing that I want to mention with regard to collective axiology theory is demonization, right? It's also important to show that our axiological balance is very out of whack. We believe that the other side is evil and that our side is good. So this study from social psychological and personality science showed the more extreme that a person's political views, the more immoral they rate their political opponents on a scale of 1 to 5. And that trend stayed even when the study participants were treated kindly by a person on the other side of that divide, right? And this also applies to both liberals and conservatives. So there's ample evidence that that collective axiology theory is really relevant in this conflict that we have in the U.S. So with that, I'm going to stop my share. I see we don't really have much in the Q&A yet, so I want to get to the next portion where we talk about what we can do about these divisions. Now, Dan talked about a few of those things, and one of the really important factors is that we are able to encounter one another in positive interactions, right? A major driver behind our division is the way that we're sorting politically in this country, right? We are much less likely to encounter someone from the opposite political viewpoint than we used to be. And we are now only encountering one another as caricatures on our chosen media channels or within social media, where those incentives make us actually more stridently defend our side. And so we are not quite the best versions of ourselves there. So I want to show you a little bit of data there as well. And so I'm going to share one more time. And I do see, I do see we have some questions. So right after this, we can pause for those questions. But I wanted to mention that there's still a place where many of us regularly encounter people with different viewpoints and even develop friendships with them. And those are the places that we work. 60% of us have more diverse friend groups in terms of our political leanings at work than we do in our social lives. And so our workplaces offer us shared goals, and they're really important those shared goals are really important for developing trust between people. And the evidence shows that the norms that we develop at work filter out into larger society, and many workplaces already have training departments, which make them a great venue to engage in civic renewal work. So with that, Sahar, I wanted to pause and let you ask a question if you have one. Sorry. Let me here. Go ahead and unmute.
You were talking about the perception gap and demonization, but what was the theory that you were relating to? I didn't catch that part.
Yeah, it's called collective axiology theory.
Okay.
And it basically has two major aspects to it in terms of how we think about folks on the other side of my identity group. So we tend to believe that they all think the same way. It's called collective generality. And we also tend to believe that there is an imbalance in terms of morality between our two groups. So that's called axiological balance. Dan, is there anything that else you want to add about collective axiology theory?
Well, you captured it very well. The other layer, which I didn't emphasize when we first published this some years ago, is the emotional layer. That moral emotions, obviously in-group emotion of sympathy, are really very prominent. Our group, is suffering, and then inseparable from that is the intense emotion of hatred, fear, denigration of the outgroup. So that's a negative value commitment, obviously. So this is so common. And to your point, Randy, the extremist mindset has infected the national conversation and has, I think, defined the way in which the political crisis is being carried out today by people who are not extremists, which is your point.
Right. Without further ado, I really want to introduce Sarah Bonk. So she goes by Bonk, and she spent over 20 years at Fortune 500 companies, including 15 years at Apple. And while she was doing pro bono consulting for political reform and civic organizations, she realized how pivotal the business community would be for helping us move past our toxic political culture. And so she founded Business for America to advocate for doing that through workplace culture and employee development. And their Business Bridging Divides report actually helped to inspire me to start my own consulting work in this space. So welcome, Bonk.
Hello, and bear with me. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here. And thank you, Randy. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Nikki. And hello from San Francisco. I live still on the West Coast, but I'm originally from Ohio. So spent many years in a very purple state. And, I think every time I go back, it's a very different experience from where I live today. And just love the opening remarks. I'm going to try to share here. So bear with me because I think I may need to take a couple steps. Yeah, all right. Fingers crossed. We'll see how this goes. So thanks again. And I think the intro helps everybody understand where we're coming from, being a business-oriented organization, Business for America, that I founded. I think also worth noting, I thought I would stay at Apple and be on the board of directors of Business for America. And what I decided I needed to do this full time, but that was back in 2015 that I made this decision. So, at the time, I think our political system or politics were a little less toxic and divisive than they are today. But I think it's just worth noting that, this sort of predates the current political era, and this notion that business has a stake with all Americans in having a well-functioning representative democracy, democratic republic, whichever term you may prefer. We're happy with both. We do have business members. We're a business membership organization. So while other business organizations may focus on individual engagement, we're looking at how do companies want to engage, that we use this lens of what's appropriate for the corporation as an entity to do, which obviously is going to be different than what an individual can do. But these are our current members, but we have a much broader network, and this includes companies from, Fortune 500s, some of which are members, but also you have Main Street businesses, small businesses, with leaders from across the political spectrum too. It's one thing that's so exciting about doing this work is that left, right, and center folks do care about what we see as these increasing divisions. Just want to emphasize that. I don't need to tell you everything about BFA, but we are unique in this space of focusing on corporations, engaging strictly on this area of how our democracy, how our government works, but how voters feel and how we get along together is really part of of having a healthy democracy. And we really make an effort to engage folks from across the political spectrum. We've been working on divisions, trying to figure this out and understand, why business should care and what business can do. Back in 2021, we did a 4-part webinar series with the Niskanen Center, which is a right-of-center think tank in DC, called Divided We Fall. And we were looking at what businesses were experiencing, what businesses could do in the workplace, in our politics, with their political spending, et cetera. And the report that Randy alluded to, Business Bridging Divides, we published that in 2022, showing how polarization is showing up in the workplace and what businesses think would help remedy the situation. So I don't need to belabor this first point that I wanted to make, which is Americans are concerned about our growing divides. Knowing that basically, the larger swath of the country cares about this, is really important. With 3 in 10 naming political polarization as a top issue facing the country, I think these numbers have gone up since this survey was taken. But also importantly, 2 to 1 is the margin of Americans who say it's now more difficult to have respectful dialogue with those who hold different views. When you compare this margin, that's worse than all the other countries that were surveyed. So America is unique here in not a good way, American exceptionalism. We're exceptionally bad in terms of, how we're not getting along. The fact that Americans care about this should not surprise you to know that we're starting to see this happen in the workplace. And there are more and more data being collected around this showing 89% of employed Americans are experiencing conflict at work. That is a variety of conflict. Now it's sort of conflict broadly stated, but it's not surprising to note that those conflicts are happening and spending about 3.5 hours a week on average dealing with those conflicts, which are increasingly political. The issue is making headlines, especially over the last several years. Here's just a few headlines highlighting that the political divides are showing up in the workplace, at the water cooler, on the shop floor. And then businesses are challenged with how they want to deal with it. Some folks trying to bring people together and engage, others telling them not to talk politics, which has its own set of issues. Third point I want to make here is that business leaders have become increasingly concerned over the years, mentioning that this is a political issue. This doesn't just stay between Americans, in our politics and, out there somewhere in the Twitter sphere. It's showing up in our workplace, and it's also becoming a force that uses business sometimes as part of the wedge issue. Part of the culture wars is, figuring out, how businesses can be deployed. So corporations are seeing this these risks manifest in several ways, whether that's political violence and the mis and disinformation that we see out in the information world, the culture wars, the workplace conflicts that are reducing productivity and affecting our workers. But it also means sometimes politicians are using this. It's their own way to take advantage of these divisions, and consumer boycotts, of course, which can have a very direct and immediate impact on the bottom line. Sometimes you may hear people saying like, oh, that stuff doesn't work, these boycotts aren't having an effect, but I would say like some of them, like a good chunk of them are definitely having an impact, and it's been a cause of great concern to a lot of companies. These pressures can come from all directions. You know, sometimes it's your employees asking you to do more, or sometimes they want you to do less. Stop what you're doing. These public pressure, think of grassroots activists, civil society groups, shareholders, investors. Those consumer boycotts can lead to PR crises. You see those politicians getting involved. And then, you know, finally, I think one of the things that's a really great risk is the risk that laws and regulations can be used to punish companies with different viewpoints. It's very interesting to see how something as abstract as these political divisions is being moved into, unfortunately effective tool in the world of politics. So just a couple headlines. You know, you probably have all heard some of these around brands. Think of Disney, think of Bud Light. Those are two of the most notable. More recently, Tractor Supply Company. That's how these political divisions are manifest. And earlier this year, January 1st, it was, and this Wall Street Journal article put out this poll noting that US business leaders rank escalating political polarization as their second most important emerging risk after generative AI, which they ranked #1. It's pretty stunning in the first time that that has happened. And another piece of data here where most CEOs are saying that political uncertainty ahead of the election is going to be their greatest challenge. That is a bigger challenge than increased regulation and high interest rates. So again, really stunning how that is affecting everyone. Wanted to just highlight a couple of our research findings. So, as mentioned, we did this research report, and it is available on our website, bfa.us/bridging, if you want to go check it out. But what we are finding is increased polarization is posing an existential risk to American democracy and to business, because we rely on having a stable political system in order to have a healthy economy too. So in our discovery project, we wanted to find out what our business is experiencing and what can businesses do about it. In our methodology, we did a series of interviews and surveys, pre and post, with 23 individuals from 18 companies. You can see here a variety of roles and companies of a variety of sizes. So it's nice to have such a broad sample. So I'd like to emphasize here that these results are not scientific, but I think that they are indicative of what's happening in the world. So first of all, what are businesses experiencing? We were seeing them having to respond to these contentious political and social issues. A lot of employees, especially younger employees, want their businesses to take action. Now at the time, again, 2022, there was still a lot of conversation around COVID, the racial justice movement, Black Lives Matter, partisan politics. I think that if we were to do the surveys today, instead we would be hearing about Israel and Hamas. We would be hearing about other issues around gender, transgenderism, etc. So, but I think that the results would still be very similar, which is to say that they are seeing these divides and issues culminate in issues in the workplace. So we asked them to tell us what they're already doing, what they're doing currently, both what's working and what's not working. So on the not working slide, one of the key points here was just leaders were simply unprepared to message these challenging topics. How do you kind of mediate conflict amongst your own workers? They were lacking these skills. But also that employee training was not effective or sufficient to help those individuals take their own sense of accountability to help calm things down when divides show up. And I think probably worth noting here that companies, including like big companies with lots of resources, were learning that anonymous internal chat platforms were enabling this uncivil dialogue. On the side of what is working, it's good to have the unifying framework. That kind of says it all. So first of all, corporations, for the most part, they take time to identify their mission, their values, the principles that they operate with. Having clearly defined inclusive corporate values, around creating the corporate culture, it is something that you need to choose to do and do it intentionally. And then having regular open communication with employees and developing those leadership and employee skills to deal with our differences. So, that's certainly a plug for a lot of the great programming out there. Tapping in just a little bit more here on that employee and leadership development that's so important. This question wasn't specifically about political differences, but recognizing that 81% of our respondents thought their company's employees would benefit, and that 56 thought their leadership layer would benefit. So that's pretty big. What does business action look like, when it comes to our political divides? Now, as you have already noticed, we're thinking about it not just about how individuals are interacting in the workplace, but also broadly. But when you are taking action on helping your employees to build understanding and have the skills to have conversations without it escalating, and instead finding more common ground, finding ways to talk about your differences. But we're also looking at when you help your employees gain those skills, this has a ripple effect out into the world. The business world, your job is often one of the places where you're most likely to run into people who are different from you and have like repeated ongoing conversations and interactions, right? So this creates this opportunity for American businesses through building these skills to have a ripple effect out into the world. So I'm going to just quickly go through this 5-lane framework that we got from our friends at the Civic Health Project, a 5-lane framework for just what does business action look like. That first one on the left there, corporate culture being so important, which we'll continue to talk about here, and how you create a bridge building culture or a listen first culture, whatever language works best for you. But community culture, businesses can reach outside of the walls of the business and support organizations. Randy mentioned Braver Angels. There's many others, some of which are hyper local and engaging folks in your own community to help bridge these divides. In storytelling, businesses can use their own advertising or their own, it could be in your corporate report. It's anywhere that you're using your marketing and communications to tell these positive stories and elevate bridge building and social cohesion narratives, as we like to say. Funding, companies are funding a lot of these things, but whether it's your philanthropic money or it is your political advertising, or political spending, if you do have like a political action committee and are engaging that way, that you can ensure that those dollars are helping to encourage bridge building rather than encourage divisiveness. And then finally, advocacy. A lot of companies do engage in advocacy. We see the polarization in our country as a material threat to business. If we don't have a healthy democracy, republic, we don't have it's going to be basically hurting our economy. It's harder to find workers. They don't get along. Customers aren't happy, and all this political instability is just ultimately bad for business. So companies can support legislation that encourages civic engagement, fosters social cohesion and civil dialogue. So that's just at a very high level. I always like to let folks know that in order to keep in touch with us and learn more, you are always welcome to reach out to me personally, bonk@bfa.us, or subscribe to our newsletter. In 2025, these narratives, these stories, and these opportunities to engage around social cohesion, around bridge building, are just going to be even greater. Right now, everything is kind of about the election. There's a lot of noise, but I think, keep your eyes open. There's going to be a lot more opportunities for businesses to get involved. Randy, was there anything that you wanted me to cover that I didn't hit in that?
Oh, that was fantastic. I really appreciate that. And yeah, a great presentation to really show, how you're engaging the business world and how they can contribute to this issue, which I think is so important. So thank you so much for that. There are a couple questions in the Q&A. One of the questions that I wanted to open up to the panel is, what are your views on the role of the media in political polarization and what can be done about it? So Dan, Sarah, did either of you have a thought about that?
I have a thought. That's one of the hardest questions. Let me just say very briefly. I believe that the media operates with certain mechanisms that foster extremist rhetoric. And it's not just the algorithms in social media where we get fed the extreme. I mean, that's obviously proven, but there's incentives to intensify the rage and the negativity. The negativity is endless, and which comes with a suppression in many cases of good news, of the kind of thing, Randy, you were saying about the commonalities between Democrats and Republicans. There is an intense strategic suppression of basically good news in terms of depolarization.
Yeah, agreement doesn't really drive clicks, right? Bonk, did you have a
Yeah.
thought about that?
I think, very well stated, Daniel. And just to say, there's, first of all, these incentives to optimize, the fear, the outrage gets you those views, gets you those clicks, gets you those dollars, whether that is, traditional media, the new media, social media. We're seeing it across the landscape. I think also worth noting, like this media fragmentation. When I was a kid, you only had so many TV channels, right? We were all kind of consuming a lot of the same information. And now, because we've got all the cable channels, but also the internet, people can not only have that many more choices, but you can hyper focus on media that reinforce your existing viewpoints, and you can isolate yourself from things that don't match your viewpoints, and maybe even offend you. So this just is helping to increase those divides, that as these information landscape is becoming more fragmented. I just would add here, like, this is where the technology world, and having been 15 years at Apple, it's both, in some ways very magical and wonderful, but also can be a problem, which is we're able to enable this precise viewpoint targeting, and that is just exacerbating things even further. Big data and this information landscape. So agree very much with Daniel on all that.
Yeah, and there's a comment in the Q&A that I wanted to mention. They say remote work makes this even more interesting as you will likely work with people across the country and the world. And that's definitely true. But I also think that it speaks to some of the challenges that exist in our modern world, because many workers are fully remote at this point and really meeting their workers for the first time sometimes, and trying to develop relationships over a connection like this, where you don't really get the opportunity to have water cooler conversations and just talk about random stuff that's not work, right? And so it does feel like there is a whole generation which was shoved online for school for a couple of years, and has really missed out on a lot of the basics of forming those relationships the way that I think previous generations really benefited from. So when we encounter one another online, it's a very different experience, and I think is contributing to some of the polarization that we're experiencing here. Okay, so I want to move on to our next. Actually, there's one more question. Did you compensate employees for the surveys, or they get time off during work to take them? Okay.
Well, at least in our surveys, we had it was a very small number of folks, and salaried people who were generally concerned about, corporate culture, and they all volunteered to do that. We're a charitable enterprise, so they were happy to help us out.
Okay. And there's a comment in the chat: most pressing to understand that inclusivity may not be possible, but tolerance is. Agree to disagree. That's I mean, it's an interesting comment. I think that we can strive for inclusivity and tolerance at the same time. Now this is both regarding people's backgrounds and regarding their perspectives, and that's definitely something that we really like to focus on in terms of these communication exercises that we're actually going to be showing y'all. Now I would like to introduce Nikki, because I'm so excited to have her on this call with us. She was my improv teacher, and she makes every gathering that I've attended of hers super fun with games. She's also the creator of Corpdev Strategies, a consulting firm that's dedicated to transforming company cultures through the power of improvisation. And by applying improv principles, they help organizations foster creativity, collaboration, and adaptability in the workplace. So welcome, Nikki.
Hi, everybody. How we doing?
Hey, okay.
Thank you for the introduction. Thanks everybody for joining. My name is Nikki Frias. Rainey kind of went over a little bit of the more generic kind of things. And I'm super excited that you asked me to be a part of this just because I didn't know kind of the conversations that we were talking about was going to be depolarization, right? So the one thing that I truly love about teaching improv, I teach improv at the Washington Improv Theater, and now I'm starting to take it to a more professional level just because more and more people are coming to me and telling me the benefits of improv and how it's kind of changed them, not necessarily from a corporate perspective, but just an individual perspective, right? And I'm just a little bit more blunt, so we get to the point a little bit quicker, right? So learning about depolarization in this whole kind of conversation has always got me to a place of understanding of like people need to get over themselves, right? We tend to think that we are the smartest people in the room. Other people's opinions don't necessarily matter, or if it's something that we don't necessarily agree with, it's something that should not be added to the conversation, right? Which I don't know because I learned this a couple days ago, but I'm assuming that's a kind of a rooted point in depolarization is the idea that people think that opinions that they have might tend to be better or stronger based on whatever view that they stand from. And the willingness to hear different things is going to make you not be as open to hearing things. So if I'm wrong, tell me. Daniel, I know you interrupt. I know you'll let me know. I know I appreciate the mastery. And Bonk, you as well, Randy. So let me know when I am wrong. But that's just kind of me in a nutshell and my ideals. So what I wanted to talk about was kind of the benefits of trust and how we can be more trustful. Improv principles are going to be beneficial, especially when you're playing games, because not only are they fun, but it kind of gives you a better view of how trusting individuals can not only promote collaboration, but it can also be a step towards depolarization because you are over yourself. You have a better understanding, going back to what Richard said of like, we can agree to disagree and I can move on. I don't need to tell you through and through what I exactly mean. And there's also a level of trust to say, listen, we may not agree, but we can all hope that we can move forward, especially in the corporate environment, to get the other goals kind of handled. Press the button. I don't know how to do it. So I'm going to first talk about how improv benefits trust, right? So do I do it, Randy? How do you do it?
No, I got you.
Okay, just click on all of them if you can. So I'm going to kind of break down a little bit of what improv does. So trust is one of them, but a big thing in improv is also to active listening and being able to respond, right? Normally when you are performing, and what I do a lot, and Randy will tell you this as well, I kind of get people more uncomfortable with not knowing, okay? We all come from different perspectives, different ideas. And being able to embrace the unknown is going to make your life a lot easier, as well as your performance if you guys ever try it, or just, even at Thanksgiving dinner, if you don't know what Uncle Charlie's going to say, that's okay too, right? We don't necessarily have to anticipate and fear the unknown. Instead, we should be able to embrace it. So improv will do that. So improv performers, they're going to take risks. It's a lot of trying new ideas, creating scenes together with the idea of we don't know what's going to happen, but we can trust each other to a place of it will end up being something. Responding naturally, like I said, it's one of those things where we don't want to anticipate what other people are going to say because generally it will lead to failure. If we have an idea of what's going to be said in a scene, specifically from the improv perspective, you tend to not be funny. It tends to just be really awkward and rigid. So being able to respond naturally is going to be something that's going to be beneficial, but it's also something that you can take into the corporate world. Talking about those kind of cooler conversations, instead of having your defenses up and having an idea of this person's going to say this and I'm immediately going to have an issue with them, being open to the idea that someone can have a different opinion than you is going to be your best bet. Supporting each other's ideas. So we will do an exercise in just a moment, but we are so rigid with how we are in our everyday lives. We are right. This is how we do it. It's a level of control. It's a safe space for us. Supporting other people's ideas kind of alleviates the pressure of being able to have to do everything all the time. I mean, I can't speak for everybody else, but I'm freaking tired. So being open to supporting other people's ideas is always going to be something that can allow you to just breathe a little bit. Building strong team connections. Depolarization is extremely important. It is something that we have to learn about. I think it is such an example that we had these people crash into this meeting and do things that we are actually talking about, which is like great example. Thank you so much. This is why we're here. But Creating a team connection maybe outside of what your views are, right? Like I can still get to know somebody and like somebody because we both like a cup of coffee. We don't necessarily have to be against each other because of what we identify with all the time. We identify with different things, of course, but it is going to be one of those things that stronger team connections and collaboration is going to be the benefit of finding the commonality, getting over yourself, and moving towards what we have to do. Fear of making mistakes, Randy. Trust is going to, of course, like I said before, help you with not mistakes is a bad thing, but being open to the idea that it's a new opportunity to either learn something new or redirect the conversation. And improv just makes life easier. I mean, I think you can kind of go into a room and not really know what people are going to say. And the idea of responding is going to make it so much more authentic to yourself instead of already coming in with your defenses up. Next slide. Great. The benefits of getting over yourself and well trust. So this is going to be in a more corporate-esque type of setting, right? So we have stronger relationships. We can have opportunities to get to know people in different spaces and not necessarily come up with the ideal of the reasons why I don't like them. Improved communication. We need it more than ever, right? We are all just talking over each other at the same time. Like I said, if we aren't over ourselves, we think that we have the better ideas. And sometimes we kind of have to relax it, all right? I always tell people, if you are the smartest person in the room, save that room for someone else. Save that room for someone that cares. But in spaces like this, when you are dealing with a lot of different types of people that have different types of views, ease it on. Increase collaboration, of course, just because we can work together and not necessarily assume different things about different people. Higher productivity, which from a corporate perspective, that's going to be beneficial as well. Allowing yourself to have other people work with you simultaneously on different projects, or even just having communication, creating company culture, it always is going to lead to more productive-esque projects, communications, times, everything like that. Conflict resolution, right? The reason why we're here today. We cannot avoid conflict resolution, but it is something that we can do better at trying to find ways to mitigate the issues that we are having. And that's why trusting people, allowing people to have different opinions, trusting people to actually do what they say they're going to do, or just that they have pure intentions in whatever their decisions are, not even necessarily from, a political, well, maybe even from a political perspective. One great example I told Randy was that my best friend is way more conservative than I am. And she's my best friend. I love her so much. But there is also too an ideal. Now, don't get it wrong. There has been some conflict, right? But there also is a place where we have a better understanding and a trust that rooted in each other's heart, we all just want the betterment of each other. And then personal growth, right? I can use myself as an example. Learning and being around so many different types of people from so many different types of experiences, having the experience to be able to interact with these different type of people and being open to their views and kind of understanding the root cause of why they think the way they do has been extremely beneficial. I normally am the loud one in the room. I can't even hide it, but allowing trust has allowed me to kind of be super more open to the idea of other people have beneficial and interesting perspectives that can add to my own personal growth. How? I know a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, Nikki, you're telling me like what I need to do and get over myself, but how can I do it? Don't you worry, I got you. Being open and honest, right? It goes back to authenticity, right? If you are not performing and you're not thinking that you have to be a certain way and you're just coming to normal settings with just who you are, there's great opportunity for you to be able to learn, but then also too, to be able to share your perspective. So that's always going to be able to help somebody in the room. Active listening. There's a reason why we got 2 ears, 1 mouth, right? We tend to think of it differently, but active listening. And when I say active listening, I mean we are not listening to respond. We are listening to understand. There is a very big difference. So if you don't know it, be quiet. That's what I say. Be consistent with actions, right? So if you are in a corporate setting, kind of rebuilding that trust is going to come from a place of actually doing what you say you're going to do. If you don't do what you say you're going to do, it's going to create a habit. It's going to create a not necessarily safe space for people to be able to feel open to have conversations, but also to be able to work with you. So do what you say. Vulnerable, of course, vulnerability is going to harbor some form of an opportunity for people to be able to work and find a space, right? So like I said, we all have different views on different things based off our own experiences, but the vulnerability allows us to educate ourselves and be open to seeing how other people's perspectives might influence ours. Admit mistakes. Listen, I know the older I get, the harder and harder it is to do, but be vulnerable to a space to also admit when you're wrong, right? That starts at the heart of it. If you want to create a safe space for people to be able to feel vulnerable and have different, harder conversations with you, then you have to be willing to admit, hey, I was wrong, or I had a different view. Clearly and often, I'm here right now communicating clearly and often. I like to think everybody's like, wow, really into this, boom, boom, boom. So yeah, it's just the benefit of meaning what you say and saying what you mean. And then empathy, of course. I don't think that's done enough in our world, right? Being open to the idea that other people have ideas and how they impact each other's. And then boundaries, 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 boundaries. If you know that you have a short fuse and you can't deal with hard conversations, bow out. We don't want to hear it, please. Okay. Know your boundaries, but also to know your limitations. If you are a type of person that I always call it take the cheese, right? Somebody will throw something out there and you immediately will start into a place of having a conversation that will turn into some form of conflict. Just do us all a favor and log out. Right? So Randy, did you want to take this over or did you want me to do it?
No, please. I go ahead. Just a note: we are taking a little bit of a chance. Folks can turn on their cameras, and so we would love to see people's faces for this exercise. Amber, thank you so much for being quick on the uptake and ready to eject people if there's more misbehavior. But we're going to keep the faith. I think we can do this. So Nikki, take it away.
Yay. Okay, awesome. So we're just gonna do a quick game. It's a little bit more difficult on Zoom, but we're gonna do a game called props. Look around you, look at your area right now. Find something. Okay. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna find a prop. As an example, I'll give you one. This is a pen. Okay, we look at this as a pen. You're going to find a prop and you're going to give it a different name and a different use. For the sake of time, I would recommend maybe we do a couple just because we have so many people in here. Maybe we'll do like four or five, Randy, your call, because I know about the Q&A. But just change what it is, right? So I'll give an example. This is a pen. It's not a pen. This is actually a microphone that has secret blasters that it'll be so loud that I'm actually talking to another country right now and they can hear me from here. Thank you. Great. Next person. Come on, don't leave me out here on my own.
I don't mind going just to set the example.
Great, awesome.
So this is a ceramic fortune cookie that I made as a child that is sitting nearby, but it's actually a nose scratcher and you can scratch both sides of your nose at the same time with the way that it's designed. So it's very smart.
Wow, double nose scratcher. I need that.
Looks like Curl has a
okay. I'll go next. This is actually, it looks like a watch, but it's actually a miniature spaceship, and I use that spaceship whenever I find a particular insect that I'm just not happy with. I put them in the spaceship and I send them off to space.
Wow, who knew? Who knew? Everybody's walking around with spaceships. All right, who's up next? Colonel Pratt.
So this is a mug. It's not a mug. It's actually a chalice of understanding. Wow. Whatever liquid you put into it, and someone says something out of pocket, you take a sip, and suddenly you understand where that comment came from.
Wow, I gotta buy that. Is that on eBay?
No, not yet.
Okay, let me know when that's on eBay, Colonel Pratt. Thank you. Fernando.
Hello, everyone. This is, just like you said, Nikki, a microphone. It's actually, it looks like this inside and it's like this, but it's a microphone and we use it in Argentina to speak to people when we are in public and especially when we are in class trying to talk to people. We talk to the little thing here, the little, looks like a straw, but it's a microphone. So I follow your advice, your idea.
Yes, yes, yes. Speaker. Great. Anybody else?
Sahar, go ahead and unmute. Nope, sorry. I accidentally.
No worries. This is a book, but it's not a book. It's a color palette. It has a bunch of paintings in it.
Wow, that's nice. Double use. I love it. Great. All right. Anybody else?
I'll go. These are not staples. These are individual coins for monetary means when and if needed.
Wow, Deborah, that's cool. All right, cool.
Gotta have money.
And Dan, did you have one?
This is a chicken. It's getting out of control. It's bobbing its head. It's got feathers all over the place, and it's really hungry.
Gotta throw it outside.
Use my spaceship.
Yeah, you gotta use the spaceship.
All
Okay,
right.
great. Guys, awesome so much. Thank you so much for not being crude because I was not gonna cuss somebody out, but I got Randy's back. I appreciate you guys. So just real quick for that exercise, right? Improv uses principles like this that we can kind of put into the ideal as well with depolarization of the concept of if someone tells you what something is based off of, you know, for the sake of this game, an item, right? It's so much easier to figure out how it is, what it does, and having more of a peak of interest instead of fighting the idea of logic. That's not a chicken, that's a cup. Well, no, tell me why it's a chicken, right? Allowing trust to come in will give us an opportunity to be able to express and learn more why people think things instead of fighting the idea that it's just wrong.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nikki.
Sorry, Randy. Thank you so much.
All right. Fantastic. Well, so I actually have an exercise that I was planning on showing to you folks, but we are running a little bit over time, and I wanted to make sure that Bonk has a chance to show us some of the resources that she wanted to display to the group. So, Bonk, did you want to take a few minutes to do that? And so go ahead and share your screen if you need.
Yes, I'm going to fly through it really quickly because, you know, I think it may be helpful to folks as they're thinking about how you can depolarize the workplace and beyond. At the corporate level, actually, it's starting at the small level. You know, when you're thinking about your business or your workplace, you may feel overwhelmed, and you may individually not be empowered to take the whole thing on. But we can all help depolarize our workplace by depolarizing ourselves. So Nikki just did a great exercise that helps get you there. But I put up a couple resources here. CitizenConnect.us is a place where you can find organizations, or just, you know, hit up Randy. He knows the field very well, and he can help you find a match for your needs or your interests. Diversifying your news feed, you know, as we just brought up earlier, in the media landscape and why it's so, how it's adding to the toxicity. Take the time on your social media to follow some folks with a different viewpoint. Me personally, you know, and as I'm working in politics here, I've got folks from across the political spectrum and a wide variety of viewpoints, including some that I find a little unsavory, but I want to know what people are thinking. And then finally, there's some really great activities online to help you in a very active way depolarize your viewpoints. One I wanted to call out here is the Polarization Detox Challenge. They give you an activity every day, and it's a great way for you to incorporate this in your life, and they will help you to do that. So depolarizing yourself is the first step. If you do have a team and a workplace, you can take accountability to bring some of those activities into your work. You might want to engage a specialist or a consultant or an organization. There are a variety of organizations, and again, Randy is an expert on this, but I'm calling out 2 free resources here to help you do that. One is SHRM, you know, the Society of Human Resource Management. They've started an effort called 1 Million Civil Conversations, and they've got toolkits on their website. And the other is Civic Alliance, civicalliance.com. You do have to sign up as a business, but they have this politics and polarization in the workplace guide that's really really handy, both in terms of here's how to do it interpersonally, here's how to build this culture in your workplace, and then again, like a resource guide. And then finally, I brought up that 5-lane framework, and I'm not going to go through it again, but when you're thinking about like how an entire company can engage, whether you're big or small, whether you are that, you know, Fortune 1 company, or, you know, it's you and one other person and your LLC. There are things that you can do to help spread the message around building bridges as a business. So I will just leave it there. And of course, you're always welcome to hit me up too. I'm happy to be a resource to anyone.
Thanks so much, Bonk. So I was going to open it up to more Q&A. I don't see any further questions on the Slido Q&A, but if anyone does want to raise their hand to ask a question for the panelists, that would be welcome. If we don't have any questions, I might actually try that activity real quick. But Colonel, go ahead and unmute yourself. And what's your question?
Yeah, so one of the things that I run into is the reaction of folks when they hear you acknowledging a different perspective and a different experience and turning that into like agreement. Like just because I heard someone out and didn't shut them down immediately, now suddenly I'm on their side, and it's like it's really hard sometimes to navigate that in different circles. So any advice that you all can give, I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question that I think those of us engaged in the work of depolarization encounter quite often, because there is often an argument that if you are engaging with someone, you're platforming them and you are legitimizing their ideas. But I really do feel strongly that that being able to communicate across nearly any lines of difference is really important. And just listening to someone does not mean that you agree with them. Now, it is very difficult to convince the folks around you that that is the case, right? Which is exactly what you're highlighting. There's a workshop that I did many times with Braver Angels called Depolarizing Within, where people get a chance to look at their own inner polarizer and how they have a tendency to demonize people on the other side. But it also gives skills for working with people, for talking with people who agree with you about those on the other side. And this is an underestimated skill set in terms of its value, because those conversations which we spin each other up and we start to demonize, we start to talk about the worst examples on the other side, and then give people the impression that's all there is. That can be really destructive. It can reinforce that those misperceptions that we talked about when it came to the theory of collective axiology, right? So being able to have those conversations that admit to nuance, that emphasize to the other people that you're talking with that not everyone is the caricature of the folks on the other side, and that if we do take the time to learn more about them, that we will see that there's a lot more common ground than we had estimated. Now, this is hard work, right? There's not a panacea that allows you to do this, but going to workshops like that, reading about the work of depolarization, and just practicing those skills in your own life, that repetition can really help to reinforce that skill set. And I also like to reinforce that I am still learning a lot of this stuff, right? We all are, and this is a lifelong quest to gain these skills. So I encourage people to come back to this skill set over and over, and just be able to also talk about it with the folks that you care about. Any other folks on the panel want to add to this?
I think it's really well said, Randy.
Thanks. Any other questions? We're almost at our time, but this has been a great group. I really appreciate the engagement. Richard?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, so often the real challenge is when you have these kinds of conversations, it seems the longer the conversation goes, the deeper folks dig into their position. And I'm wondering if between the panel, if you all know of any techniques, any way to put a pause on it, to point them in a different direction, or yourself. But what do you do when, like I said, the more you get into it, the longer the shovel and the deeper the hole?
Yeah, and Nikki, it looks like you'd like to mention something.
Yeah, I wanted to say something real quick to Colonel Pratt. I think in those kind of spaces, just because I have been in different industries where I have worked with such different types of people, I think the bigger conversation you need to ask yourself is, like, why does it matter that this person sees exactly how you feel, right? Like, if you're having a conversation with somebody and they are not understanding it, right? At a certain point, I would assume, but like, I also too am not a master in this. You have to have the conversation of like, this person is not willing to like hear me out, so I got to move on, right? And I think that always goes back to like the internal work of recognizing that. And then the second thing I was going to say towards Richard was, you know, you got to read the room, right? If you're in a space with a group of people that you know are going to want to talk about some things or be more passionate about it, you know, at a certain point, you either don't engage in those conversations because you recognize these people are very different than, you know what I mean? Like these ideals are very different than the ones I know, and they could be confrontational, or you kind of just swing the conversation completely different, or you bow out, right? Because sometimes people want the smoke. People want to have those conversations, and being able to read the room and seeing people around you like this is what their intention is, you sometimes might have to also read that as well. That was all I got.
If I can build on that even just like super quick, because I think it relates both to both of the last two questions, which is, you know, there is a way to have a conversation, you know, you start to get engaged in this micro level and think about, you know, when you find yourself starting to get riled up and, you know, the conversation isn't constructive, to immediately step out of that argument and go to the 30,000 foot view, right? It's kind of like the meta conversation or conversation about the conversation, right? And saying like, hi, like I want to, you know, we obviously don't agree here, but I want to have like a conversation. I do want to understand you. So like, again, stepping out of the specific content and talk about the conversation. And if that other person responds and kind of like, I also want to have a conversation. I do want to understand your viewpoint, but they may not be willing to. That's the one little trick to help you identify more quickly whether the other person is willing to engage on a good faith basis. You do not need to sit and argue with people who aren't willing to have a good faith conversation back with you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to add something. And by the way, we're putting our contact info in the chat. So if you'd like to reach out to us, both Nikki and I have consultancies for working with organizations, obviously, and please reach out to Bonk and please reach out to Dan about the stuff that you've seen. But so Julia asked the question in the chat: how can we work with someone or a group of people who refuse to listen or be open to other ideologies? And this is connected with the previous question. And you know, I've run a lot of depolarization workshops, and we have emphasized a whole set of skills that includes paraphrasing and you know, reflecting back, asking good questions, and doing all these things that, when it comes down to it, it is about curiosity, right? So in all of these conversations, I know that they can be extremely frustrating, and I have probably had just as many as you all have had, you know, that have been unproductive, and maybe, you know, I didn't approach the right way. But when I am able to fall back on my curiosity and really try to tease out how this person has come to their perspectives, what experiences, what in their life story, you know, trying to get that story, because at heart, we are a narrative species, right? That is how we communicate. It is how, you know, even before we develop language as toddlers, we are processing the world with us as a central character in it, right? And so we communicate with our stories. So try to get their stories, and then once that person has felt heard, then, you know, maybe contribute your story. But you may not be able to get to that point, right? You may not turn that person to their own curiosity, but I do find that leading by example can be very helpful. So let's see, any other Fernando, I saw that you had your hand up. Since they're not kicking us off, I'd be happy to stick around and see if you had a question or comment that we can engage with.
Okay, actually, more than a question, it's a bit of a comment. One of the things I do appreciate the last two comments from Bonk and Frias and Nikki, because you guys kind of addressed the issue that I was going to raise. I am from Argentina, and I've lived in Japan for about 20 years. And one of the things that bug me the most, seriously, every time I'm married to an American, so I go to the US very often. One of the things that bug me a lot about going there is that people always talk about how Japan is so racist or xenophobic. And I'm like, how in the world do Americans think about Japan that way when it was actually the US who dropped the bomb? It was the US who had the Japanese in camps. It was the it continues to be the US that is having this. I appreciate what Daniel said in the beginning about the hate, because I see so much of that hate being portrayed outside of the US. And I'm like, what is your mirror? Why don't you put a mirror? So I want to go back to the comments from Sarah and Nikki about how you address the stadium, how do you address the stage in these situations. And I think that the US as a whole has an issue with its educational system, because it's actually, Randy, you and I are having a conversation on LinkedIn about this, and I'm like, how do people don't see it? How is it possible that the portrayal of the other is so strong so as to call Japan xenophobic, and like you have such a huge racial divide? So it kind of bugs me personally, but I love this conversation because it's like, okay, this brings me back to what are the tools that we need to address these conversations, to have, to foster this dialogue. So wonderful work. I really want to like my thumbs up for the wonderful work, and like just leave a note on like, let's be critical on our own words, no? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for the comments, Fernando. I think that is a really valuable perspective. Obviously, your perspective is hyper international, right? And I certainly feel like Americans have a lot to learn from other places around the world. I did some writing recently about American exceptionalism and whether that is a useful idea at all. And certainly there's plenty to criticize about it. But I guess my mindset is that I think that everyone has something to offer, right? And I think that the U.S. does have some things to offer the rest of the world in terms of leadership in some areas, but we obviously have a lot to learn as well. And so coming to the table as individuals, as communities, as countries, with the mindset that we have something to contribute and something to learn at the same time, like that is, I think that's the ultimate idea in this space. So, Colonel, you had another comment or a question?
Yeah, just want to flag that let's not forget that there are people and forces in the United States that benefit from the divides, from the miseducation, from the xenophobia. Like it's not a neutral playing field. There are bad actors. There are people who want us to be like.
Yeah, there's a principle that Amanda Ripley in her book High Conflict emphasizes called being a conflict entrepreneur. And there are a lot of people in this country who do benefit from that very directly. So yeah, we absolutely, when we're doing this work, we have to also be aware of the structural incentives that are in place, right? That do this to us. So it's not just the interpersonal work, right? It is also working on the structure of our media, especially the incentives that social media create, and all of the other structures that exist within our society that perpetuate and benefit from this division. Dan?
Yeah, great conversation. To Fernando's point, really interesting, fascinating example. My perspective tends to be kind of psychologistic, social psychologistic. I think there's a great lure for moral competition, for moral supremacy that is very contagious, and it's inseparable from political divisions. Our country is better. It carries over. We are better people. And with that is a fear of doing exactly what Nikki was doing with which is get over yourself, which I totally want to put as a very high, high principle for depolarization. And get over yourself is really, I love all the points you made, Nikki, about vulnerability and so on. We, in political controversy, there is a fear of looking stupid, inferior, or or vulnerable, and a fear of exposure, a fear of being not only humanizing the other. We don't want to humanize the other. We don't want to humanize ourselves. We don't want to really be open because of the lure of this moral competition.
So we have one more question. We're at the top of the hour. So Mindy, did you want to ask a quick question?
Yes, I did. I also said I had to leave for a bit, and I hope this was recorded. Yes? Okay, send that. This is invaluable. I'm a social scientist myself, and much of what you said enhances my understanding. Okay, some of the earlier responses were, well, this conflict hinders our opportunity to really talk to each other. So what does one say in terms of showing one's values or showing one's concerns in conflict situations? Some people will just leave that aside and not bring it up, fearful of entangling themselves with people who won't open themselves up to exploration. I have a friend who was a trustee of an organization. He will not bring up certain things because the fallout can be awful. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I definitely have emphasized that a lot. I think that our panelists may have some thoughts to add. So please go ahead.
The only thing I was going to say, Mindy, is kind of going back to the comment of like reading the room, right? So you have a friend that you were saying is can't say certain things in certain spaces. I think we have to recognize, kind of going back to what the other panelists said, of like, there are just going to be people that don't want to hear what you have to say. And unfortunately, when you do say certain things in unsafe spaces, you do run the risk of having yourself be uncomfortable, but also to be in places where people just automatically don't like you.
Yes.
So you do run the risk, no matter where you are, especially if you're talking to people that don't know who you are, of those things. The only thing that I would recommend as immediate advice is going back to it, reading the room, but also if there is vulnerability, being open to the idea that you could learn something new based off of whatever someone's telling you that's different. So that's where the active listening comes in. But then it's also recognizing, like, we have different views, and maybe not, and I'm not saying this is you, but using active listening, we don't have to be combative. We don't have to automatically write somebody off because they are saying something different that we don't understand. So I would just say reading the room and active listening and coming to a place of authenticity with yourself of, I agree, I disagree. It's all based in your delivery. And that's going to be a game changer when it comes to depolarization.
Yeah, Bonk, did you have a comment to add?
I do. I had just a little bit of a reflection on something that we've noticed as we've engaged folks on depolarization work, and I've heard this also from some of our friends, like at the Disagree Better organization. Governor Spencer Cox of Utah and I had a conversation about this on a webinar, and it is around, when you run into barriers of people that don't want to engage in this kind of dialogue. And so from our friends on the right, the reaction to the bridge building and these conversations around understanding, they tend to the skepticism tends to be rooted in, oh, this is some kumbaya nonsense. You want me to like forget what I care about and abandon my values in order to get along, and I don't agree with that. So that has been generally what we've heard from our friends on the right. From our friends on the left, we hear, I love it, it's great, building understanding and respect, and yes, love it, love it, love it. But I'm not going to talk to those people that I think have viewpoints that are beyond the pale. Mm-hmm. They don't believe in my right to exist. They don't believe in XYZ, whatever we've been told. And and it's pretty shocking. And it's honestly been a tougher barrier to get through in some cases. So, in addition to all these wonderful remarks from Nikki and Daniel and Randy, and how we do this and how you depolarize yourself, sometimes I like to bring up the story of one of the heroes in this bridging space, and man named, before it existed as a movement, a man named Daryl Davis, who is a Black man who befriends members of the KKK. And he literally becomes friends with them, forces them basically to see him as human. And it's through his kindness and openness that he gets them to, and in some cases, these are grand masters, gets them to denounce the KKK. He's got a collection of KKK robes. It is really, so when you're challenging yourself of like, how am I going to overcome the divides and the challenging conversations that I'm facing? I think that is someone that I personally take inspiration from, that, everybody deserves for us to start these conversations and do what we can to see where we can find common ground and move forward together.
I think that's a great point, and definitely he's an example who has inspired a lot of people within the bridging sphere. And it comes along when we talk about that example, we also have to acknowledge that people have to be kind to themselves and recognize what they personally can do, right? His example is extraordinary, right? And we're obviously not like asking people to everyone to engage in exactly that kind of work, right? But I think it is a fantastic example of like how far we can stretch ourselves, and what it's possible to do when you're willing to really embrace the discomfort. And so, yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Bonk. Thank you to all three of you, Bonk, Nikki, Dan. It has been an absolute pleasure being on this call with you, and all of you for joining us and contributing really great questions and comments and great participation during the activity. So thank you so much. Anything else that the panelists wanted to mention before we jump off?
Just echoing your thanks.
Randy, you are the change agent towards peace. Thank you for bringing us together. This was your brainchild, and it's wonderful to be on the panel with Sarah, Bonk, and Nikki.
My pleasure. All right.
Yeah,
well, thanks everyone.
Randy, thank you so much. This was awesome.
All right. See everyone later.